about immigration law at the Mount Airy Learning Tree with Judith Bernstein Baker. Is that Baker Bernstein? Bernstein Baker. And it was, it was really mind-altering. So complicated, immigration law, and the laws in the United States are constantly changing. And of course, immigration and refugees and asylum seekers, that's one of the issues that Amnesty is concerned about. And there are tens of millions of refugees around the world right now, not just here in America, but everywhere. And I think I've read that there's the most in modern history right now, around the world. It's just enormous. So it's a very timely issue, especially with the Trump administration. So at the last moment, Stephanie was able to step in, and Stephanie Lubert, okay. She works for HIAS, which is Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and it's a very old immigration organization, and they're right here in Philadelphia. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So as Frank said, I'm a staff attorney at HIAS Pennsylvania, and it stands for the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and we originally we're over 130 years old. We started in response to the influx of Jewish refugees fleeing to the U.S., and so we're the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and then over the years, kind of the populations that we serve have changed, and so we serve people from all religions and nationalities, and we just simply go by HIAS now to make it a little bit more inclusive. We have a social services part of HIAS and a legal services, so we do have a refugee resettlement team, which means we have a contract with the government to receive and resettle refugees. Those numbers have obviously been very much down to basically a trickle this last year or so due to policies under this administration. And then we have a growing legal services team where we offer free to low-cost immigration legal services to the entire state of Pennsylvania. We do kind of focus on Philadelphia because that's where we're located, but we are the largest nonprofit immigrant legal service provider in the state. We have a few focus areas, so one of our main focus areas are victims of domestic violence. We also have a crime victims team for non-domestic violence, citizenship and naturalization, and then we do a removal defense. And the largest team is the team that I'm on, is our immigrant youth team, where we have a contract there's two, we just have the contract for one. So in Lehigh County, there is an Office of Refugee Resettlement run immigrant youth shelter for unaccompanied minors. And if anyone's been following the news, Vision Quest set to open here in Philadelphia, and they've been having some legal battles over permitting. And so that's also going to be an immigrant youth shelter. They define it as like staff secure, so for kids that they've deemed are flight risk or suspected gang members or have behavioral problems. But what falls under a behavioral problem it's loose, so you could just have a teenage boy being a teenage boy and doing nothing more than punching a pillow, and then they decide that he's aggressive and needs to be further detained in a more strict, like secure environment. So it's loosely interpreted. So we do go in and we represent the detained children. We have a whole team that goes in and does know your rights presentations to the kids so they understand what their rights are, what's going on. We'll do legal screenings with them, representation, and then I personally worked on what we call our released docket, or non-detained. So these are kids that were formerly detained in a shelter, were then released to what we call sponsors, be that a family member or guardian. Some are in long-term foster care programs, and I represent those kids that are actively in deportation removal proceedings. So it's a lot of asylum cases and a lot of what's called a special immigrant juvenile visa for kids that have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents. So that's where my practice is, but we do represent a lot of adults. And people hear about us through court. When you go, and if you don't have an attorney, the judge will hand out a list of low-cost legal service providers. And so HIAS, along with our sister agency, Nationality Service Center, and there's a few others in the area, but we're the two largest, are listed on that list, so people will get our information through court. The judge, for a while on the youth docket, people from my office would go down and stand in the back of the court, and we would do little Know Your Rights presentations and screen people and say, like, hey, you don't have an attorney, we're here to offer free consults, do you want to talk to us? And we can pick up clients that way. We partner with we partner with the schools. We go into the schools and we train teachers. We will screen the immigrant student populations in certain Philadelphia schools. I think we go like Philadelphia, Montgomery County, and some in Phoenixville, so that teachers know how to kind of identify kids that might need to be referred for legal services or how to deal with immigrant youth, and then the kids are made aware of how to contact us. We partner with the Mexican consulate. There's Puentes de Salud, which is a health organization in South Philly. So there's a lot of community organizations that we partner with that would have our information and be able to refer in. And then we've been around for so long and have so many clients, really it's kind of word of mouth. And so we definitely have more demand for services than we can provide. When I started at HIAS in 2015, we were about a staff of 20, and our projections by the end of this year is to grow to a staff of about 70. So we are growing, but it's still not enough to meet the just extreme demand for free to low-cost representation, because a private attorney can, on the low end, could cost like $8,000 up to $15,000, $20,000, and that's a lot if you're undocumented, maybe not working at all or working under the table, paycheck to paycheck, and you might have multiple family members, and that's not including a lot of the applications that you would need to file for relief have a fee, a government fee associated with it, and fee waivers are getting harder and harder to get. So there's a lot of expense, and free to low-cost services are really needed right now. So that's a little bit about me and HIAS and what we do. And so I guess like today I did want to talk a little bit about I can, whatever anyone's questions are, I feel free to like just shout questions out and I'm happy to answer them. I was going to talk a little bit about a colleague and I recently did, led a trip of pro bono attorneys down to El Paso to the border, and we worked with some of the organizations down there and went to the detention center. So if that's of interest, I can kind of explain a little bit about what we saw and what was going on down there. So while HIAS Pennsylvania, we are loosely affiliated, more on our refugee resettlement side than our legal services side, with we call HIAS National. It's just HIAS. We go by HIAS Pennsylvania, there's just HIAS. They have offices in DC and New York, and so they organized a trip, like a delegation of 7 pro bono attorneys, and a colleague and I, since we had experience with asylum law and spoke Spanish, we kind of supervised the trip, and so we worked with an organization called Las Americas. They're located in El Paso, and El Paso, I think the largest border crossing where the largest influx of migrants are coming through are the Tijuana, San Diego, Port of Entry, and then the El Paso, Ciudad Juarez. So there's a lot. I don't know, someone threw out while we were down there, one of the people we're working with, that like 1,000 maybe, over 1,000 immigrants are released into or flown into El Paso every single day. So it's a large volume, and El Paso is a very difficult jurisdiction to win cases in. It's very hostile. We're lucky here in Pennsylvania, or in Philadelphia at least, as terrible as you hear about things going around the country, at least we have really good immigration judges here that are fair and just, and no, we might not win every case, but at least there's a chance. I think grant rates are about, it's about like 50-50. And
that's good?
It's good, like all things considered, where in El Paso, apparently the grant rate is less than 7%.
Can you explain that term?
Grant
Rate. So, so if you're like in removal proceedings and the government's actively trying to deport you, you need to apply for some type of what we call relief. So some way that you can stay here legally. A lot of the time, and what we're seeing now with the immigrants coming is a lot of asylum cases, but it doesn't necessarily have to be asylum. There's a whole lot of, there's like T visas for trafficking victims and U visas for victims of crime. There's, you know, people who are beneficiaries on like a family petition. There's all different types of things, but I'll mostly just be talking about asylum because that's what is happening. Most of the cases are right now, and what people are fleeing and seeking asylum here. So when I'm talking grant rate, it's not just asylum cases, it's kind of like whatever people are applying for and seeing those get approved in court so that people can stay here. In Philadelphia, it's about roughly 50-50. It kind of depends on the judges, which judge it is. So you have, you know, a shot at winning your case and being able to stay here versus in El Paso, your shot of winning would be 7%. So more likely than not, you're gonna get a removal. You're gonna get a deportation order.
This is even the people that were wanted to get here on asylum are still being, only 7% of them?
Only 7%. Even less, it might be even less.
That's because they can't prove, I guess, that.
Some judges don't even care. I mean, it's very, there's discretion. So even if you meet all the elements, say, just using asylum for example, you meet all the elements and you prove that you've been persecuted in the past, or you have a well-founded fear of persecution, and that this persecution was on account of the 5 statutory protected grounds, which is race, religion, nationality, political opinion, and social group, which is kind of a legal term of art. Even if you meet all that, there's still discretion. And if you have an anti-immigrant judge or a judge that's trying to enforce the agenda, because they are appointed, they're not elected, they're appointed by the administration. They do work under the Department of Justice. They are not independent of the Attorney General. So the Attorney General is appointed by the President, and then the Attorney General controls and gives what the judges like can't do and their policies and what they have to follow. And then you have the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, trial attorney hearing the cases, and if the Department of Homeland Security is not really willing to agree to anything or work a deal, and you have a judge that's trying to enforce policies where they're cracking down on asylum grant rates and don't want to grant asylum, then there's not much you can do. There are appeal processes, but again, that's all. They're not elected judges. They're all appointed. And
Are the judges here in Philadelphia appointed also?
yes, yep.
But they're more.
It's like a job application. You're like, I want to be a judge, and you apply. And we've actually had we've had a few new judges, but 2 of the more recent judges that have taken the bench came directly as Department of Homeland Security ICE attorneys, so they were working actively to deport people. 2 of our judges on our bench in Philadelphia currently are former ICE attorneys.
Right.
They do not have the highest grant rates.
So So earlier you mentioned that there are 1,000, at least an estimate of 1,000 people being deported a day.
Or just coming into El Paso, just coming in.
Okay,
Yeah.
what about the people who are deported? Do you follow up with them to make sure they get a home safe? Because there are also a lot of human trafficking happening in the borders.
Right. So it's interesting how the deportations work. So if you're not detained, you know, you've been released and you're going to court on your own accord. So if I were to take a client in tomorrow and they got a deportation order, we would walk out of the court, the client would have that piece of paper in their hand and they would go home, and like that's that. And in theory, they might get a phone call from ICE saying, report to this office, this location, this time, bring your things and we're gonna deport you. Or they would, you know, run a raid and come to the house looking for the person. Or there's actually a lot of people living here with removal orders that just haven't been picked up yet, and maybe, you know, 10 years down the line they get stopped in a traffic stop or something, and then the government finally enforces that removal order. So the only time they would like actually be dragged out and deported would be if they're detained and they're already in a detention center and there's like nowhere to go. And we personally, like, so our detention center is in York here. There's an organization in York that handles those cases, and then a lot of private attorneys. We don't, Highest personally doesn't like go to York and represent a lot of York detained cases. We will if it's one of our own clients that, you know, somehow gets arrested and detained. We'll follow that case through, but we're not doing a high volume of those cases. So I don't know. We don't have a lot of like data on what happens, but I know that there's national organizations, and there are, I don't like know names off the top of my head, but like you can look for statistics where there's some groups. I know there's one in Honduras and maybe one in Guatemala that will try to follow up with deportees to see like what happens.
Or if they even make it alive.
Right, and some reports that I've heard is like it's not good. I know personally, I've had one of my kids' father was deported last year, and when he was deported, he ended up back in El Salvador, and he was like really sick because the conditions in New York were so bad, and he was like hoping for a speedy deportation just to get out of there because the conditions were so terrible. But it was this whole terrible thing where the local police in Plymouth meeting stopped him in an illegal traffic stop, and so they took his passport and his birth certificate and the car and his money and everything. And so then ICE was like, we need your passport to deport you faster, but he's like, I can't get the passport because the police have it. And it was this whole thing, but they finally deported him. But while he was there, just the sanitation, the quality of food, the quality of medical care, the mental health toll it takes, like people get detention fatigue, and it just takes like a toll on your body as well. It manifests physically. And so by the time he was there, what I would say like a short stay, like he was in and out in like a matter of maybe like 3 months, 3-4 months. And when he landed back in San Salvador, he was like vomiting, had a fever, was like very ill. And he was trying to escape gangs, and the last contact I had was he was basically moving locations like on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to try and like stay safe. And so while he like is down there living, it's like it's not a good standard of life, and and it was terrible when he was detained here.
What's the status of the asylum seekers while they're waiting for the trial? Can they hang around in town and go to English classes?
It depends. So if they're not detained, if they've been released, so there's a few actually. So if we like back up to the border, so if people are crossing the border, there's like a few ways you can present yourself at a port of entry and say like, I'm here to apply for asylum. And then at this point, it's like, I know in Tijuana there's a list, and so even though you can't even present yourself at the border if you want to, but say you like did get across, or you just crossed like through the river or something, and you got detained, they can either put you in a detention center, and then you're there for the duration of your case, unless you can find a way to get out on bond. And they set these really, I think the lowest you can pay for bond is $1,500, and they're usually higher. You can get released on an ankle monitor. or you can just get released and maybe have periodic like phone check-ins with ICE, or you can just straight up get released and given a court date. So if you are released, yes, you're like living in the world. You can only legally work after applying for asylum, after filing the actual application, after 180 days that it's been pending without delay. So it's kind of also this legal term of art as well. There's an asylum work permit or an EAD, employment authorization document clock. So people will talk about, attorneys will talk about an asylum EAD clock. And so it's not just, 180 days, you just started counting. If you ask for a continuance for attorney prep time or to gather more documents, or you miss like a fingerprint appointment and you go the next day, or you ask to change the date of something, it would stop a clock and it would be a delay to your case, and then it would stop this clock, and then the 80 days aren't counting anymore, and there's all these things you can do. So the simple question is like after 180 days, the simple answer is after 180 days, you can get a work permit, and the asylum seekers they have no status. Their status would just be like undocumented, but like pending asylum application, and they would have a work permit. But again, it's complicated, so it's not just 180 days. There's all these different things that can interfere with that.
Isn't the Trump administration trying to delay the asylum EAD clock, like make that wait longer before they can submit?
They're trying to get rid of it at all and just not give asylum seekers
So to
EADs at
clarify, I
all.
know everybody in the room kind of wonders where we came from. We all work at an immigration law firm.
Okay,
So we saw this through Immigrant Heritage Month.
okay.
We understand.
You get it, you get the complexities, okay. Yeah.
So how about now with the cases that apply for asylum, affirmative asylum, and they are actually getting the interview even faster so that they
Yes.
don't get the EAD?
No, so they don't. So we're seeing it with, so for the immigrant youth, for example, because those are like going really fast. You used to apply and you would wait like 6 months, you still not have an interview, and you can get the work permit. Now, I just had one go to, from date of filing to interview was like a month. It was so fast. I had to ask for continuances a few times. There was nothing to do because we filed a very basic application just to kind of get it in and get the clock started and the process rolling. And then the interview at the asylum office came so quickly. I was like, we need time. Like, this kid's not even ready to like talk. So no, that came so fast, and that teenager, my client, she was asking like, oh, can I get a work permit? And I was like, well, even though your application, like, it's been out there for like 2 months or so, really on the asylum clock, it was like 10 days or something because of how, it was ridiculous of how quickly it went. So no, it's getting harder and harder because the interviews are coming faster. It's harder to gather all the documents. For a lot of the asylum cases, your only proof is really the person's word, their statement. It's very difficult to gather corroborating evidence from home country. There's not a lot of witnesses, or if there are witnesses, they might still be in home country and they might be afraid to talk. There's been many a time when I've been on the phone with a family member or someone in like El Salvador, Honduras, and they don't even want to talk to me about the gang situation because they're like, our phone might be tapped, or someone might be listening, or everyone knows everything, like they're too afraid. We're relying like heavily on reports from different NGOs and research, even like Amnesty International, that puts out reports to kind of corroborate country conditions, or reaching out to experts, which can be difficult because experts sometimes charge a lot of money. So just corroborating can be very difficult. It's not like medical records are easily accessible, or there might not even be medical records at all because people are afraid to go to the doctor in their country, or there's no police reports because they're afraid to report, and it's really difficult to corroborate those things. And then as hard as it is for adults to like talk and tell their story in a very like chronological, cohesive, like flowing manner, because they've suffered trauma, it's even worse for kids who a lot of times don't even have the proper language to even describe like what they've experienced and gone through. And so as the interviews come faster, and we're expected to prepare, attorneys are expected to prepare cases faster. It's difficult because the client themselves just needs some more time to gather their thoughts and work with the attorney and practice telling their story. And yeah, you can have some like train wreck situations where this client has suffered so much, but they just can't articulate in a way that the officer wants to hear or the judge wants to hear, that kind of ticks all these like legal requirements. Yeah.
When you were in El Paso, you saw some of the children?
We actually...
Could you state a little bit about
Sure.
how they're living and what's going to happen to them?
Mm-hmm.
If they don't have relatives, they cannot apply for asylum, I suppose?
They can still apply for asylum on their own. It's just,
How does a kid apply for asylum?
Yeah, I know. It's like, yeah. You need an attorney. Like it's
The
difficult.
4-month-old child.
So
Yeah.
if they're like, if they apply for asylum and they're denied, like you're saying, only 7% of these cases get approved.
In like El Paso.
So
yeah.
do they deport these kids by themselves back to their home? Like, is that even legal?
I think for the kids, so I'm not sure it's going. So when the kids come across, what you're seeing in the news where they're talking about like, the unsanitary conditions and everything, they're held in what's called a processing center. It's basically Customs and Border Protection run processing center where they're just trying to get their information, and they're supposed to like send them out to these Office of Refugee Resettlement run shelters. Why is it Office of Refugee Resettlement? Because the government has decided that they're best situated for like the care of children. Anyway, so they're in these processing centers, and by law, they're not supposed to be there for longer than 72 hours. We're saying that they're there for like weeks, hence the like conditions. They're really just supposed to be there to kind of, I think, either get fingerprinted, maybe make contact with the consulate, or like try and figure out a family member, figure out who is this child, who are they, and then within 72 hours, in a perfect world, they're supposed to be shipped off to wherever there's bed space. So like we have the shelter here in Lehigh County. There's shelters all over the U.S. So they would come, and it's
Some
more...
are coming to Burke?
Burkes are for family units, and actually as of now, I think there's only actually 2 families in Burkes. There's like barely anyone there, yet they like still won't shut it down, but that's like another thing. So the kids go to these shelters, and the shelters are more like group homes, and I can tell you the one in Lehigh, while separating detaining children is not like ideal, it is a nice facility, and they do like care for their needs. But what you're seeing in the media are those processing centers before they're shipped out. The thing is, so many children are coming, there's not enough bed space, they haven't built new shelters, and so they're apparently, they say they have no other option, and they're just holding them in these processing centers that aren't meant for long-term stay. They're meant for just a few hours, at most like 72 hours, if that. And